by this parliament. Those in favor say aye, the contrary no.
The creation of new constituencies to bring the number of MPs to a staggering 497 has raised the spectre of transactional politics and gerrymandering in the next general election, which is barely 6 months away.
Congratulations to West Brama that has got to, and congratulations to the whole country for the new constituencies.
It happens, it's like you have to go and look for the minister, then plead. So we are going to at a certain time see someone coming with a parish, then it becomes a constituency because that person has pleaded.
Gerrymandering means manipulating the electoral boundaries so as to favor one party or class by the community that has acquired say with the favor.
I am contesting because my people went to London. We went to London. We even picked the map that we were told that that map would then help us for the division of the two counties. But up to date, nothing has been done.
Barely after the 2011 polls, civil society and the opposition suggested a raft of changes to level the playing field. But with digital campaigns likely to make the process of a credible, free and fair election opaque, the creation of new constituencies could further tilt the landscape in favor of the incumbent, argue civil society actors. Godbert Tumushabe, the Associate Director of Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, GLIS, told NTV that this gerrymandering bears parallels with that of the 1980s election.
So these constituencies that are being created is basically the classic case of gerrymandering. In other words, there is no difference between President Museveni today and Paul Mwanga of 1980.
Crispy Kaheru, a civic and governance expert, says that the creation of new constituencies barely before the polls creates suspicion.
For me, I think it only points to one thing. This is the greatest form of gerrymandering, whereby politicians seek to choose the voters they should represent rather than the voters actually choosing the politicians that should represent them. So for me, I think it's a clear case that government is trying to carve out administrative units for the people that they would want to appease, politicians that they would want to give constituencies. And we normally see this closer to the election.
Conducting efficient and effective civic education.
Kaheru, who previously worked as the coordinator for Citizens Coalition for Electoral Democracy in Uganda, says this gives undue advantage to the incumbent as the electorate is expected to return the favor through the ballot.
Used as a political tool to thank, to appreciate those people that have either voted for a particular political party or as a campaign strategy to appease people in order to receive electoral support.
It's what Tumushabe refers to as the dividend through the sleight of hand.
Gerrymandering is one of the biggest distortions you can have when it comes to having free and fair elections, because free and fair elections, elections that are, because our constitution creates a 3 standard for elections. They have to be credible, they have to be free, they have to be fair. The fourth one, we have almost achieved it, which is the regular. Every 5 years, you know, you have elections. So that we have achieved. But when you to achieve credible, free and fair elections, you have to create an electoral system that is certain, that institutions, the election management governing bodies are accountable.
Really been very, it's not creating a moratorium on administrative unit creation has not been really in the interest of government, because it's been used politically as a token to hand out to those people that have supported a particular political inclination.
There's evidence to suggest that the incumbent seems to gain due advantage as a result of the creation of new constituencies. For instance, of the new constituencies created in 1996, Museveni won 89.2% of the vote against his national average of 74.3%, says Accord, an advocacy think tank. In 2006, President Museveni won 73.6% in the new districts against his national average of 59.3%. Kaheru suggests that the government ought to prioritize electoral law reforms to level the playing field.
Very critical matters that have not been resolved. Let's talk about issues to do with money in elections. When government brought amendments before Parliament, there was a clause that pointed to the whole a framework that would regulate campaign financing. When Parliament was debating the electoral reforms, this clause was part of the amendments that were proposed by government through Parliament. By the time the bills were assented to by the President very recently, that clause that seeks to regulate campaign financing was no longer in the amendments.
According to the Constitution, the creation of a new constituency is based on an expanding population size and geographical size.
The Constitution is very, very clear on this. It depends on, it has perimeters that we must follow. Population is one of them, the geographical terrain, the expansiveness, the size of the area, and of course the interest and the request of the people through their district councils. And I think this one was done. So I think I want to take the opportunity to congratulate the people of Visinjiro.
Tumushabe argues that the creation of new constituencies is anchored on the clientele patronage politics.
They have even done it in the first year and the second year, but you see, they have to time it at a point when you are already on the campaign trail, you are in the election season, because that's when you derive a lot of political dividends. But having said that, I think the tragedy that we face as a country is the fact that we are increasing the costs of public administration, the costs both in terms of money, but also in terms of inefficiency. Because there is one thing where you can spend too much money, but the kind of bloatedness that President Museveni has been, has subjected this country to is that it also creates inefficiency, it creates overlap, it creates corrosion within the public service system, that even service delivery is completely diminished.
In one of the research papers authored by Tumushabe and Zaigario titled Uganda's Tax Burden, the Financial and Governance Cost of a Bloated Parliament, it was recommended that to guard against the problem of gerrymandering, the Constitution and other appropriate legislation should be amended to require the Electoral Commission demarcate constituencies based on population rather than the current practice, which is based on administrative units. They recommended that per capita representation be set at 200,000 people per constituency to reduce on the size of parliament.
These are the countries with the highest GDP per capita in the world. Luxembourg tops the list with a GDP per capita of $113,000. Switzerland has a GDP per capita of $83,000. Norway and Ireland have a GDP per capita of $77,000, while Qatar has a GDP per capita of $69,000. These countries also have a welfare system where they give benefits, pensions, and grants to their communities. Uganda has a GDP per capita of $777, which is the 17th lowest in the world. But in stark contrast, Uganda will nearly have 500 members of parliament in the next August Assembly, compared to Norway and Ireland, which will have 169 and 160 members of parliament, respectively. About 70% of Uganda's recurrent expenditure is geared towards wages. But across the country, whereas poverty rates are declining, income inequality is rising, resulting into the poverty inequality nexus.
A scholar at the Economic Policy Research Center, Madina Guloba, opined that it's flawed to create new constituencies at the time the COVID-19 pandemic upended the economy peppered with a shrinking tax base and rising debt.
Then we ask ourselves, are we setting our priorities right within these times? It's a hard time. So if it's political to put the constituencies, okay, that's okay, but the economic bit of it matters. When you look at the budget right now, 70% is consumptive. Consumptive in such a way that recurrent expenditures are high. That means the wages, it's mainly going to the wage. 30% of our budget is development. And the total budget, in terms of it running, is of course on loans, the interest payment on loans. We don't want to reach the situation where the new constituencies come for us to borrow to pay salaries now.
Because this country could as well be served by no more than 100 MPs, you know, very smart, decent, credible legislators that take the country to be the most important thing, that are very patriotic, that are not just there on transaction. Because President Museveni has created this huge parliament, and it works for him, because you see, when you are operating in a regime survival mode, you don't want people who think. You want a crowd which you can confuse, and where you can have people to buy and sell. So it works for him.
Members, House is adjourned to Tuesday. House adjourned to Tuesday.
We have got another new constituency called Napore constituency. And first of all, I want to thank His Excellency, the President of this country, for taking all the mantle, the visionary leadership.
For instance, in the 2020 budget, interest payment on loans will receive a lion's share of 12.4 trillion shillings. In February 2019, the International Monetary Fund warned that Uganda's public debt to GDP will rise to 49.5% by 2021 because of growing fiscal expenditure by government.
You know, borrowing is not bad, but how are you borrowing and where are you spending the money to repay? If you're borrowing to actually consume in elements and investing in elements that are not productive to repay, that's where the issue is. And of course, right now, the interest on debt is already worrying. It's reaching the ceiling that we normally say, I think, it's around 50% and above of the GDP. And it's really worrying at the moment. And we are seeing Parliament increasingly passing new loans every day. If you look at the National Committee on National Economy, they'll tell you there are several people waiting out for them to pass loans. And the issue is, where are we spending these loans?
There's also a variance of opinion in regard to the creation of new entities, including districts, cities, and municipalities. Whereas the political elite favor the creation of new entities, technocrats view it as being at odds with fiscal prudence.
And therefore, Parliament has no capacity to do anything right now other than doing, you know, being involved in just some mumbo jumbo, and they pretend that they are doing big things, but which they are not doing. If we had a Parliament, Emma, if we had an effective Parliament, there is no way you can have the judiciary, which is the third equal arm of state, that the contract of a Chief Justice can expire, and the President, who has a responsibility, a constitutional responsibility to appoint a new Chief Justice, does not do it, and the Parliament is there passing bills or passing resolutions to create constituencies. I mean, where are their priorities?
Guloba says government creation of new entities depletes grassroots of critical social services. Unless government caps public expenditure on administration, a system which seeks to reward the political elite and their cronies, the common man will continue to bear the burden of sustaining such a large expense. Emmanuel Mtaiziwa, NTV.